Welcome back to the panel discussion, Delivering the Digital Government Mission, sponsored by Avaya Government Solutions on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your moderator, Jason Miller. Our guests today are Adrian Gardner, the Chief Information Officer at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Harry Lee, a Senior Computer Scientist for Infrastructure at the Census Bureau, Greg Pelton, the Chief Technology Officer for Avaya Government Solutions, and Chuck Riddle, the CIO at the Government Printing Office. Now, gentlemen, before break, we had just got done with security. I know we could talk more about security, but I'm going to move us off to really the cloud and where it can take your agency next, specifically around mission and citizen-facing apps. Maybe those are synonymous, one and the same. Maybe they're a lot different. So let me start with Harry, since earlier on in our conversation, we talked a lot about that you're a data-driven organization. You provide data. That is your customer. That is your goal in many respects. So how are you starting to say, how can we take advantage of the cloud to really impact how we meet our citizens or customer needs?
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, as I said, we're in the data services business, and we conduct censuses and surveys. So if you look at the data life cycle, how you collect the data, process the data, analyze and research the data, store and retain the data, and disseminate the data. So we've, at the Census Bureau, we're looking at the survey life cycle, and we're looking at all the business processes and all of the existing systems that support those processes to come up with a shared services approach of how we do all of that. So we have a major initiative about our data collection and processing. And what we're doing, if you look at the various components of that, is where is cloud a great viable alternative for delivering the service of collecting the data? And the same thing for the dissemination piece. So the business needs and the business processes are driving how we as technology providers provide a very transparent service and address the peaks like we talked about earlier with cloud. So again, cloud is just an alternative, and whatever we do has to be transparent. It has to be great service, better, faster, cheaper, and securely, right? So that's kind of what we're doing.
You talked about shared services, and I'd like to just maybe dig into that a little bit deeper. When I hear shared services, I'm thinking Census working with GPO, working with FEMA, all kind of going through a similar kind of pathway. You're not talking shared services maybe in that regard.
Actually, well, right now I'm talking about shared services from what we do with the core mission of Census. We are looking across commerce for a variety of shared services and where we might leverage an existing service. It might be a cloud-provided service or not, financial systems, administrative systems, strategic outsourcing opportunities, things like that. So, yeah, we're working shared services at the commerce level, but within the Census at a mission level as well.
And when you talk about working within the mission level, is it this mission area and that mission area working, sharing either infrastructure or sharing data, or not data per se, but sharing tools, that type of shared service?
Tools and process. So if you look at all the surveys and censuses we do, all of them will use a standard process infrastructure to deliver the surveys and censuses. Okay. Right now, we do them independently in a number of ways. So there's the value. Again, the maturing of the business and the transition of the business, we need to just align our service provider, IT services, to support that. So sharing a process as well as sharing systems.
Adrian, let me turn to you, because over at FEMA, and I know from more broadly, again, DHS, as we talked about earlier, they set up several shared services. I know Workplace as a Service, Test and Development as a Service. Is that starting to kind of fall into how you look at your mission apps, your citizen-facing apps?
Oh, absolutely. So it's a combination, really, right? So you're looking at those things that are delivered at the enterprise level, and then those things that can be delivered at the component level, and then making sure that those work integrally and interoperate, if you will. The other piece of it is, we are also a big data driven sort of agency. So if you look at the recent strategic plan that the administrator just released, it's within his top 5. One of the big things that we're moving now is really how do we get to data-driven sort of decision-making, eliminate or decrease our reliance on paper, and then really move towards data analytics. And that's going to help us then with the customer-facing applications and services that we need, because we actually need to share that information with our partners outside of the federal fence line, if you will, with state, local, and tribal, and then also the private sector. And so this whole notion of how do we now take that data, turn it into shared services across the board and start moving it out is extremely important. So I think we're talking about shared services, not just federal to federal, which is already sort of happening in a coordination role, but also federal to state, local, and tribal. How are the services going to be shared across the board, and how do they sort of meet in the middle to create the overall sort of what we're calling right now a common operating picture?
Now, has the cloud opened up opportunities for you to make sharing, communication, even mission-critical apps with the state and local, tribal customers easier? Have you started to go down that path?
Yeah, even with the citizens. So, we're as we were talking about contact centers and that kind of thing, we're actually looking at cloud capabilities to be the infrastructure and to support for a number of those capabilities. And then also, if you're looking at our surge, when our contact centers actually reach their maximum, if you will, how do we offload that traffic to partners that we already have relationships with? And cloud is actually going to play an important role in how that actually happens.
Greg, let me turn to you, because one thing that we heard is not just shared services, but mission-critical, citizen-facing, and as Adrian talked about, contact centers. From your perspective, what is Avaya seeing from customers in terms of moving stuff into the cloud that's critical, either mission or very citizen-centric?
So I'll start by talking about shared services, because that's an interesting one. There are mandates for shared services, but it's really hard. And you can do it within an agency, and you've got that kind of trust in that, in some ways, shared mission. And in that case, it looks more like enterprise architecture. How am I going to have my architecture, same architecture across different parts of my agency? When you go to move shared services between agencies, then one agency has to be a service provider. And most organizations don't have that competence. They have to build that competence, and it really has to be part of their mission. In some cases, it makes sense. In some cases, it doesn't. But I'm seeing much more shared services inside agencies than outside. In terms of the putting mission critical apps, contact center, call center is a good example, and that's a case where you do need the burst capacity in certain cases. It's also a case where, and a lot of times, what we're seeing today is that it's agents on phones. And so that's a very antiquated way to deliver service, and to be able to honor an SLA you have with the citizens. So I will answer your call within this amount of time. I'll have this amount of this percentage of first-time call closure. It's hard to do that way, because you can't really predict what the demand is, and you can't staff high enough in order to meet it. So one of the nice things about a cloud implementation and moving a portion or all of your contact center to the cloud is you can actually implement the new services as well. So you can put a lot of automation in. You can put a lot of self-service in. These are tools that to build that and to script it is relatively expensive. And with capital budgets it's hard, but to buy it as a service is really straightforward. It's just a monthly payment based on the number of agencies. So evolution and revolution within the contact center through cloud delivery is something that a lot of customers are very interested in.
Chuck, you're shaking your head a little bit for folks on the radio that can't quite see you do that. Give me a sense. Are you, when it comes to citizen-facing apps, because you do a lot with the citizens, they come to your website to find the Federal Register, they come to your website to find legislation. How are you changing those apps, those mission-critical apps as well?
Yeah, I really view cloud as just another way to be able to deliver things faster, and where it makes sense, we'll certainly take advantage of it. And I'm thinking back to the FDSys approach. We process a lot of data there, too, everything related to the legislative process. We want to make it available to citizens and to other government agencies to do what they want to do with the data. So we've been working on the ability to take XML in bulk and make it available to citizens and to do whatever they need to do, because they may not find it in exactly the format that they want in FDSys, so we want to make it as available to them as possible. So really, I hate to oversimplify it, but it really comes down to how can cloud help you do that better without having to go through the traditional, if you build it, wait 6 months, however long it takes you to roll it out. With cloud, it helps you to get to that process a lot faster than in the past.
Let me just open this up to the panel more generally. Are there concerns or things you need to consider when you're taking a citizen-facing app into the cloud versus hosting it in-house? Or is that maybe the easiest type of app? Now, of course, it depends. Now, if it's a loan application like a FEMA, that's a lot different than just let's say, the latest survey from the census that you want to get the data out. So I know there's complexities there, but what's the considerations you do need to keep in mind? Let me start with Adrian.
Yeah, I would say the whole notion of customer satisfaction. We're so quick to automate, and sometimes we forget that the sort of personal people part of that situation and that issue as far as interfacing. So I think automation is great. I think cloud will provide that, but I really would say customer satisfaction and customer service. I think the government as a whole, I mean, if you probably ask citizens, I don't think we would get very high marks from the standpoint of customer satisfaction and customer service. But then how can we use cloud and other capabilities to actually complement what we have today to actually bring up, I guess, the satisfaction rates that our citizens have and our capabilities and our skills and products? I think that for me is the number one thing, is really looking at how do we improve the service. So even if we're going to a shared service, is that shared service going to improve and give me a better result than I actually had when I was actually doing it myself? I think that has to be the question that's answered over and over again. And we also have to ensure that we reach people where they are, and we reach them in ways that they want to be reached. In other words, some folks may want to go through a call and then push 1, push 2 for this kind of service. They may want to simply talk to a person. And so I think we need to facilitate both of those things. We shouldn't let the technology drive us to a place where we've sort of forgotten that customer service and satisfaction piece.
But at the same time, you can go on the back end. You could put a lot of your back end infrastructure, back end
Absolutely.
data into a secure cloud, and that will then make that processing of that front end customer service and
Yes,
satisfaction.
and so especially if you're talking about business intelligence, business analytics, where when that person calls, I know exactly who they are, where they're calling from, that location. All those things are sort of attributes that I think the cloud capability will bring to the table for us. Now, leveraging those in real time is extremely important.
Greg, let me turn to you real quick. Is that really the value that cloud's going to bring, or is bringing when it comes to mission critical and customer service apps, that business intelligence piece where you can, I've talked to Chuck before. Chuck, you live in Nebraska. You're a veteran, et cetera, et cetera. Is that where you're seeing it too?
It's one of the big values. Because it's difficult to go and implement that within an existing infrastructure, being able to get it from the cloud and buy it by the drink, if you will, makes it attainable for almost everybody. But we're seeing more and more the application of business intelligence, of knowledge of the customers and the previous transactions to help fine-tune the response. It's very, very important, and it directly relates to the SLA with the citizens. What are they expecting from you? What level of service, and how do you change the needle? I give an anecdote, and I won't name the agency, but we had a customer with a large call center that had an SLA to honor. Within a certain number of minutes, calls needed to be answered, and they thought they were doing very well. We went in to upgrade that system and move it to more of a cloud kind of environment. And what we discovered was the system was actually engineered that at a certain number of minutes, if the call hadn't been answered, they would abandon it. And so in reality, they were only addressing maybe 30% of the incoming calls, but it looked great because they would abandon before the time out of their SLA. So they didn't have visibility into their infrastructure that they owned. Putting it off and having the visibility, having that delivered through an SLA by a service provider allows you to provide dramatically better service.
Now, there's a couple of people on the panel who cringed when they heard you say that they were dropped. Chuck, from a customer service perspective, I mean, what are you guys doing at GPO where does the cloud fit into that customer service side?
I'm thinking back to Adrian's point about taking a bad process and automating it. All you've done is automate a bad process. So I think one of the benefits of cloud possibly is that it forces you to take those archaic processes that you've automated in the past, and maybe they worked 30 years ago when you first automated it, but they need to change. And I think one of the ways where cloud sort of forces agencies to modernize is before you modernize it, move it to the cloud, you really have to rethink exactly how you automated it to begin with to make sure that it can be moved into something that's maybe more commodity-based or more process-based in a modern way, if that makes sense. Because, again, just taking something that worked a long time ago and just moving it to the cloud, you really haven't accomplished much.
Right. So I think Mark Foreman used to say, paving the cow paths. Let's not do that with cloud. We're getting toward the end of our discussion today. This has been fascinating. So I want to we'll start on the far end with Adrian this time, since we started with Chuck in the beginning. Where are we going with cloud? What are you seeing in the next 3 to 5 years? And what do you need, either from the government side and or from the vendor side?
Yeah, again, I think I see larger adoption in the mission space as we gain more confidence in things like email as a service and infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. I really believe that now you'll be looking at mission applications and services. What we need from industry, again, is really the commitment to sustain those services and capabilities at the levels that we need them. So I really think that the whole challenge we have right now is taking this initial, I would say, good start, and then actually growing it from a standpoint of the trust that government agencies would be willing to put in their mission applications in the cloud.
Harry.
Well, I see, again, earlier I mentioned about the mission enablement, about collection of data and the survey lifecycle. I think that continuing to standardize the way we deliver the business of conducting surveys and censuses, the cloud provides the opportunity to give us a scalability to deal with rapid needs for change. I think that's critical as well. We're also looking at mission-enabling support systems, or admin systems, or IT support systems, and where might cloud support deliver those services as well. I see our role as an IT service provider becoming more of a broker than truly, managing infrastructure and so forth. So again, it has to align with the needs and business of census and commerce.
And that broker role you mentioned, we didn't get into much. That's a hard role. I mean, a lot of people don't. That's not a comfortable role for a lot of people. Are you guys, real quick, doing anything to kind of make it more comfortable?
We're staying very, very close to the business. Again, when we look at shared services, it's shared business services, not shared IT service necessarily. So really just understanding the business of census and being a trusted partner.
All right, Greg?
So I think cloud is an opportunity for government agencies to dramatically upgrade the infrastructure and the services, and that's been a bottleneck for a long time, and we have a lot of aging infrastructure. So that's a great point, and I think we'll see government services improve pretty dramatically over the next 5 to 10 years. The one impediment to be concerned about is all these services in the cloud, they run over a network. And so if that network isn't a good network, whether it's on-prem or in the service provider, you've got problems with delivery of service. So I know you did an earlier show on network fabrics. And so having the right network fabric within your agency to be able to deliver those services predictably, real-time, low cost to manage is pretty important too. And I've seen a lot of interest in upgrading the underlying networking infrastructure.
All right, Chuck, you got the last word.
Yeah, well, I think the pace of technology is getting faster every day, and I think one of the things that cloud is going to help us with is it forces us to modernize and to move forward. And I think that the hype behind cloud is starting to wear off, and the reality is starting to set in on what will actually work. And I think as we get more comfortable, as there's more confidence that it's working for years, I think agencies are going to be more comfortable with moving that much further.
All right, good last word there. Hype. No longer, more about reality. That's all the time we have for today. You've been listening to the panel discussion, Delivering the Digital Government Mission, sponsored by Avaya Government Solutions on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your moderator, Jason Miller. I'd like to thank our guests today. They were Adrian Gardner, the Chief Information Officer for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Harry Lee, a Senior Computer Scientist for Infrastructure at the Census Bureau, Greg Pelton, the Chief Technology Officer for Avaya Government Solutions, and Chuck Riddle, the GPO, Chief Information Officer. If you miss any part of this discussion, please visit federalnewsradio.com and search Avaya.
On behalf of Avaya Government Solutions, thank you for joining us for this informative discussion. You'll be presented with some polling questions as you leave the webinar to help us improve future sessions. We appreciate your feedback. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to you for you to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested a training certificate for this webinar should receive it in the next 2 weeks. Be sure to register for upcoming webinars from the Capital Exchange. Look for upcoming sessions at www.fedinsider.com/events. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.